Good morning, zookeepers, and welcome back from the summer abyss, I guess. I don't even know what to call it. Sabbatical? Time away from the microphone. Anyway, thank you guys for allowing me this time to figure out my new life rhythms and new schedules, balancing all of this new chaos and getting things figured out. I also wanted to say a quick thank you to this season's sponsor, BetterHelp Online Therapy, but we're going to check in with them a little bit later. Also, for more great shows to listen to or tips and tricks to starting or bettering your own podcast, head on over to the Podbelly Network at podbelly.com. Anyway, like I was saying before, I took this summer off from most of my podcasting responsibilities. I didn't record a thing all summer, basically. It wasn't easy for me to make the decision to step away, however, it was necessary. Over the past few months, Shalane and I have spent lots of time reconnecting, reorganizing our schedule, reorganizing our house, recreating our priority lists, and reading tons and tons of books over the summer. It's been so nice. I've taken almost all the time I could to just spend time with my kids. Honestly, this new career path has just taken so much more out of me than I thought it was going to. I wasn't really prepared for this job. Being an outside sales rep, the learning curve is never ending, but this has been, and I still believe it is, the best choice for my family moving forward. Similarly, this podcast is important to me, and I believe that we've worked out these rhythms in our family and in our home enough that I can come back properly to produce the zoo and get it back on a regular schedule. I really do think that this podcast moving forward is part of my family's future. The Feenstra Zoo label is going to do nothing but expand. Not quickly, not immediately, but there is a trajectory in place here. But enough housekeeping. I'll tell you all about our summer in different episodes moving forward. But today's episode, we're diving into legacy. Now, I know we've talked about it a little bit before, but today I really want to talk about what we leave behind and what we want to be remembered for. To do this, what I thought would be fun would be diving in depth into a few people who hold my admiration. People who I look up to theologically, spiritually, in accomplishment, basically in every way that I think people should be admired for. Now, this list, like any list I've ever done, is not exhaustive. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and I do this because I want you guys to dive into these topics as well. The first man that I want to talk to you about, you've almost certainly heard of. In fact, I would say I guarantee you've heard of him. This is Clive Staples Lewis, or better known as C.S. Lewis. He was a writer, a literary scholar, and an Anglican theologian. He held an academic position both at Oxford and at Cambridge at different times, and of course he's best known for writing the Chronicles of Narnia, the Screwtape Letters that I might have brought up once or twice across this platform, and the Space Trilogy. He was born in 1898, and he passed away in 1963. Diving into C.S. Lewis's past, I found out that he was a close friend to J.R.R. Tolkien of Lord of the Rings fame. And it's no wonder that he wrote 30 full novels and that he's been translated into more than 30 different languages. He has sold millions and millions of copies of his books worldwide. Those close to him knew him as Jack, a name that he actually took after his childhood dog, which I thought was just a fun fact. And although he was born into and baptized into a Christian faith as a baby, he was not a practicing Christian until he was 32 years old, after the First World War, during which he was commissioned into the 3rd Battalion of the Somerset Light Infantry. This is of the British Royal Army. He served as a 2nd lieutenant, and then he was later transferred into the 1st Battalion of the same regiment. He served in France for most of the First World War, and he endured the worst of trench warfare. He lost his friends, he lost his brothers, he endured the German Spring Offensive, and ultimately he was demobilized from the military in December of 1918. And through all of this, he even tried to re-enlist for service in the Second World War. Ultimately, he was denied service there, but I just thought that was crazy that this man went through trench warfare, saw the worst of the worst of the worst. But through his writing, unless he's directly referring to his service, you would never know. Now, after the wars, he went back to a scholarly life. He went on to become the head of medieval literature at Cambridge. And he started this path as an Anglican theologian. He created spectacular works of fact and fiction, along with brain-shattering essays and teachings. So, why does this man warrant my admiration? Well, first and foremost, his literary works have helped shape my adult life. If you want proof, again, how many times have I quoted this man on this podcast? C.S. Lewis gets quoted in my works more than almost anyone else, if not more than anyone else. Again, Screwtape Letters and Mere Christianity are mentioned all the time on my podcast. I probably owe him royalties at this point. But secondly, his story. He was a sound and pronounced atheist until he experienced trench warfare in World War I. It's said that he came to Christ after speaking with J.R.R. Tolkien, but it speaks volumes about who he was as a man to be able to see the worst of the worst of the worst of humanity and then come out and find God. That is why C.S., or Jack Lewis, as he's earned my admiration. Because he had the ability, or humility rather, to come out of the darkest situations and still know how to embrace the light. Another man that I've come to admire and quote frequently is Jefferson Bethke. Although he's only 2 years older than me, he has been given gifts of wisdom and leadership and speech that are astonishing. Along with being a successful YouTube creator and a few great podcasts that I listen to regularly, he is a public speaker, he's a life coach, and of course, he's an author, writing some of my favorite books, including To Hell with the Hustle and Take Back Your Family, He also wrote It's Not What You Think and Jesus Over Religion. If you want more of his life story, I suggest reading To Hell with the Hustle. But I promise you will come away with so much more than just a good story. I'd be willing to bet that this book alone will change your life just like it did mine if you open yourself up to it. This one book, it was able to get me to question how I structure my life. The reason I admire Jeff Bethke so much is not just because of his wisdom. I mean, yes, but it's so much more. It's his passion. It drips off the pages of all his books. If you listen to any of his spoken word or listen to his podcast, it's palpable. It's almost visceral when you hear him speak. He's just so fired up every time he opens his mouth. His YouTube videos have some of his spoken word performances, and do yourself a favor, go find them. Just YouTube Jeff Bethke. You'll understand. It's so good. Now, literally the same week that the Jeff Bethke's book To Hell with the Hustle came out, a different author released a book with a similar theme. It's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And although these guys run in similar circles, they had no idea of the other's project. Jeff Bethke and John Mark Comer, who you've definitely heard on this podcast quoted many times as well, they released a podcast together, just a short run. I think it's only like 8 episodes. It's the Fight, Hustle, and Hurry podcast, where they go back and forth just talking about their themes that they coalesce. They're just like symmetry in their writing is just fantastic. This brings me to John Mark Comer. He is another man who has earned my admiration over the past 5 years. I mean, it should come as no shock that these 3 guys top my list right now. I talk about their works constantly. I'm constantly urging you guys to pick up their books and dig in, because, man, there's so much there. Now, a bit about John Mark Comer. He is the founding pastor of Bridgetown Church in Portland, Oregon. He also has a couple podcasts of his own, and he's frequently featured on several others. And of course, he's an author. Some of his spectacular titles include The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, Garden City, Live No Lies, Loveology, and many, many others. What draws me to John Mark Comer is this man's peaceful and unanxious presence. No, I haven't met him in person, but when you read his books or listen to his shows or his teachings, I'm a huge fan of his audiobooks because he reads them himself, and it adds so much. But you can't help but slow down when you dive into John Mark's works. Now, I want to be like all 3 of this men in various aspects, hence my admiration for them. But this trait is especially what I want to be as a person. this person who just exudes peace. Someone with an unanxious presence. So when you sit down with me, you're physically shifted into a place of peace, a place of rest, of refuge. This is what Shalane and I are trying to make our home into. And it's not always a win, especially with kids around. I mean, we do not have a spa-like atmosphere here by any means. But this is one thing that we're striving for in the zoo. Something else that I do admire about all three of these men is they are fathers. And after reading their works and listening to how they talk to or about their kids, it's heartwarming. And more, why I appreciate them is they have taught me about generational success, where they're not just setting themselves up for success. They're not just setting their own bank accounts up for wins, but they're setting up their kids and their grandkids and so on and so on. And for this reason alone, an honorable mention for this list, but definitely a man I admire, is Jon Tyson. He is a pastor and author out of New York, and I read his book, The Intentional Father. Now, of course, he has several more books as well. He has his own podcast. He runs his own church. He is a church planter by trade, I guess you would say. He starts them up, gets them going, teaches them how to be successful, and then eventually moves on. But for fatherhood, these four men have so much to teach. Now, I'm not going to dive into all the lessons that I've learned from them for personal or fatherly success, not in this episode at least. But there is so much to unpack in just 10% of these four men's work. To give you a little snippet, like I said, for John Mark, it's that unanxious presence. For Jon Tyson, it's that intentional parenting. For Jeff Bethke, it's that passion, that raw emotion. For C.S. Lewis, it's the unbelievable wisdom and the ability to find light in the darkest places. And of course, like I said before, there's several more people to the list of people that I admire. For example, Jeremy and Audrey Roloff, of course, quoted a ton here as well, but their books and their podcasts, without them, the Feenstra Zoo wouldn't exist. Jeremy and Audrey did a podcast called the Behind the Scenes Podcast, and I listened to every second of it. And it's been off the air for a few years now, but it inspired this podcast directly. I heard what they were doing, and I loved that they could just throw nuggets of knowledge into just a conversation basically between the two of them, or they frequently had guests on as well. And it was just a little nugget of knowledge surrounded by a story, and I was like, hey, I can do that. I have the technology. It doesn't take much to start a podcast, honestly. If you have a cell phone, you can do this. But they inspired a lot in Shalane and I's life. Other people, like spiritual leaders like Billy Graham, Dallas Willard, past pastors and mentors of my own, guys like Jeremy Light, Sid Coop, Kelly Stickle, my current church family, leaders of our church like Andy Arnold and Nate Johnson, so many other guys there, and their wives are just fantastic people. My own friends and family, so many people to name. But why I'm going through this list of people, why am I going through this list anyway? One reason is because they have wisdom and gifts that have impacted my life. But more, I want to get you to think about the people in your own lives. People who have impacted you, people whom you admire. And the reason why I want you to do that, because I want you to think, how will I be remembered? I've had people in my life who have passed away, and I never told them why I appreciated their presence so much, why I appreciated them in my own life so much. And I talk about this stuff, unfortunately, at their celebrations of life. Most recently, both my grandparents on my dad's side passed away in a car accident. It was quick. I'm told it was probably terrifying, but relatively painless. There was no long drawn out suffering, which I guess is the biggest blessing. But unfortunately, these two people, my grandparents, passed, and I didn't get to tell them how much they meant to me. So at their celebration of life, I got to talk to my aunts and uncles, my cousins, my dad, and express these things to him. And there's one theme that kept coming up when people would talk about my grandparents. And they would say that, my grandma was the kindest, gentlest person. She was so caring. She was a caretaker. She was easy to talk to. She was inviting. It was so great. And when they talked about my grandpa, it was, he wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, he commanded a room. Oh, and did you ever hear him pray? Did you ever hear Grandpa pray? And us grandkids were always like, yeah, of course we did. He prayed all the time. He prayed with us. He prayed for us. But then it stuck with me that, my grandma was inviting. She would draw people in. She would have that hospitality that people strive for. And so many times it was, did you hear Grandpa pray? And I was like, that's what I want to be remembered for. Spencer's home was inviting. Spencer had this ease to talking with him. And did you hear him pray? No, really, did you hear him pray? And I know biblically, we're supposed to go into a closet and pray. It's between God and I, but it's an honor to hear someone pray. Whether it's blessing a meal or you catch their mumblings or whatever as they're leaving, or as you're leaving a room or something like that, that's an honor. That discussion between God and man is an honor to hear. And I never thought about it until their celebration of life, that that's something to be remembered for. And isn't it something that all of us want? We want something to be remembered for. We all want to have a legacy to leave to our children. Is this not why kings try to expand their kingdoms? Powerful people build monuments? I mean, here's the good news. We will all inevitably be remembered by someone for something. But here's the rub. It's not always what you want to be remembered for. Someone told me once that even though you're the hero in your own story, you might be the villain in someone else's. Now, if you're like me, that sparks a when you think about it. But long story short, you will be remembered. But what do you want to be remembered for? What do you want your legacy to be? Do you want it to be a kingdom? A monument? A series of worldwide headlines describing your acts of villainy? Or some random guy with a small podcast saying this person changed my life? Or maybe it's good enough that your kids remember you and say that they love you. Or if it's not wanting a family life, maybe you're just seeking spiritual success. And your line for legacy is, when I pass, I want hell to celebrate because I'm no longer in the fight. Now, I believe that that is a life worth living. I believe that that would be a deeply impacting life. What I want my legacy to be, I want my wife and children to be proud of me. I want them to think of me and have good, happy memories. I want my life to have set them up for success, and I want my grandkids to be set up for success, and I want their kids to be set up for success, not just financially. I mean, that too, but I want the formations and I want the foundations that my wife and I set into our kids to be good. I want that to be pour into as many generations as possible. I want to leave a spiritual legacy. Like I said, a few years back, I lost two monumental heroes of faith in my grandparents. And it was their celebration of life. They weren't even in the room, and they changed the trajectory of my life. They were up partying with Jesus, and they still had a lesson to teach me. I want people to remember me in the same way. Now, I have a big poster board in my bedroom full of things that I want to accomplish, but it basically boils down to these 2 points. I want generational success for my family. I want to build a life that my family is proud of. And I want a spiritually strong and healthy life. And that is a life worth living. My question to you is what's yours. What is your life that would be worth living? Now, if you made it this far to the end of the show, I've got something exciting for you. You can share your thoughts with me in the new Feenstra Zoo Facebook page. Start a group. It'll be a closed group, so you ask to join. You can share your thoughts there, and you won't be made fun of. It's going to be a safe place. I'm going to monitor it super heavily so that any hate, any nonsense, this is not going to be in the group. That's not that kind of place. You all can't come over to my house for a cup of coffee at the same time, but you can come join me there and share your thoughts. So please come join the Feenstra Zoo for a cup of coffee. That's all for this episode, guys. Thank you so much again for allowing me to take this time to reset my home, reset my rhythms. I love you guys. God bless.